Hello and welcome to Birmingham Cameras Online here. I'm Brian Whelan and now I'm joined by a very special guest here today. I'm joined by Niall Breslin, better known to most of us as Bressie. So good afternoon. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks a million. It's a while since I've been in here.
Yeah.
Different circumstances.
It's so we're filming this in Tramline, which is a venue just around the corner from our store. And it's a really cool setting. Thanks to the guys for allowing us to use here to film this today. It's a bit different.
I've gigged here, I think. We did a few gigs here back a couple of years ago, so yeah.
There you go. Yeah, as I say, a bit of a different setting to the last time you were here.
Absolutely.
So I say thank you for joining us today. So we're doing this video just to talk about something we've worked together recently, and we supplied you with some equipment. So the equipment was based upon you requiring to create some content for your Where Is My Mind podcast, which I'm sure most people watching this will be familiar with, and if they're like myself, to be a fan of it and the work that you do on it. So maybe if you could maybe start off by telling us why you reached out to us about the equipment, what you needed the equipment for, and why you reached out to us, please.
I think it's very important to point out that, like, when you see things about media, you see audio visual, but they're actually very different. Like, the approach, audio is where I would have my skill set. I grew up, music production, understanding how audio and sound waves work and how to manipulate them and edit them and make them sound good or bad. But visual is an entirely different kettle of fish for someone like me. And it was quite intimidating, because you're like, I know I have to upskill. I know I have to build that element into the podcast, because podcasting are becoming quite visual now. And you kind of, it's like upskilling really, but there's this assumption that they're the same thing. They're not. They're some overlapping things, but I kind of didn't have a clue where to start, to be perfectly honest. And I didn't have the time to dedicate to actually really figuring out all the stuff I was going to have to do. And I'm not a big fan of YouTube. So I reached out to you guys and it's like, listen, I need help here. Can you help me out? I don't know where to start, what to use, what type of cameras I'll need, what lenses I'll need. Any of that, how to use the bloody things, and how to use the software, how to use all that kind of stuff. And I'm a good learner. I'll learn quick once I know what I'm focusing on. And you guys came back and were like, we're in, like, whatever we can do to help. And the setup could have been simpler and actually took the intimidation out of it and has really added to what I do. And there's other elements, not just the podcast. When I'm interviewing people out of a studio, I like to bring a camera and have a fundamental idea of how to set it up and frame it and stuff like that. So that's something I've only learned in the last couple of years, but it's with good equipment. I think it's the same with audio. You can use bad audio equipment, but it's never worth it. It genuinely isn't. It's the same with visual.
Okay. So after the initial conversations we had with you, when we were talking, we kind of felt that a Canon system was best for you. So, and I think you were kind of happy to go with Canon because you would have been familiar with the brand, and to be fair, it probably would have been what you would want to go with anyway. So we were on the same wavelength immediately, and we supplied you with two Canon R6 cameras, a 16mm f2.8 and a 50mm 1.8 lens. So they're both fixed lenses, which are good for giving a shallow depth of field, but also for working within the room that you were working in. And then we supplied also a green screen background, the Blackmagic 810 Mini for switching the camera angles, lights, tripod stands and things like that as well. You touched on it there a minute ago. We wanted to make it as easy for you as possible because, as you say, it can be intimidating. You can look at stuff and go, where do I go? What do I do? What's right for me? So we tried to take that out and go, this will work. Yeah. You sent us a few photos of your room. We were like, okay, it's going to work in here, but you also needed to be portable as well, as regards to, say, take it out on shoots and go to locations. So we felt that this setup was going to be perfect for that. So would you agree that, the kit that's supplied is portable, easy to use, and as I took maybe the part about it that you were intimidated by out of that, and that you were comfortable with it fairly early?
Absolutely. And also it was a small room. I didn't think we were going to be able to make it work. I was worried about, I've only a small room for podcast, but also because it's relatively soundproof, it's in my home, I have to be in that room. We couldn't put it anywhere else. So that was the thing I was a bit concerned about. But was actually interesting, once I set it up, and you talk about the portability element of it, I went to America literally a couple of weeks after, and I had to bring the entire setup with me. And I brought both cameras. I brought, apart from the lights and stuff like that, I brought like the pack. And I ended up my first week there, I was interviewing Robin Williams' and it was a very emotive conversation, as you can imagine, with one of my heroes. And I wanted to have two cameras because, like, you can see it in the two of us, and sometimes it was kind of very close. It captured an awful lot, and actually really added to that podcast because it got really emotional at one point. Obviously, talking about his dad, and you know, you can see things in the video that you wouldn't have seen from a wider kind of cut, and it was very much his facial expressions they're talking about. So that being able to go on the road and actually do it quickly. So I had him for an hour. That was it. So I had to make sure the cameras were set up, my audio was set up, and all that to do. I had no producer. I'm on my own. So I'm very comfortable with the Canon setup. I actually had a Canon years ago, like a kind of smaller one I used to have when I was in college. And actually, when you kind of get used to the screen, the templates are kind of similar across the board, which makes it a hell of a lot easier. So to me, speed is something I need to be able to set it up, go, know it looks good, and also know that I'm feeding it in, because I was using the kind of eCam setup as well to do it. So all that stuff took time, and I'm still not massively 100% comfortable with it. And there's probably a million things like I haven't learned to do on it yet. But what I'm doing with my camera setup is every week I'm learning one little thing. That's it. I'm not trying to learn two things, one thing every week, and each week. So what that was, 12, 13 weeks. You're picking up little things every single time, and you're adopting it to each week. And that's a good way for me to learn. If I try to learn too much about something like visual, I just get overbearing. I can't do it. So that's how I learn. And now I'm starting to put little tips into my editing and stuff that, it doesn't make me look anymore like I'm editing on my phone and some crap app.
That's
probably does still look like that, but I'm trying to not make it look like that.
Like something you said there is something that we try to get across to so many people who are buying kit that they're not familiar with, or that they might be moving up, substantially in the range. You don't need to be an expert on the whole kit the first day you get it, or the first week you get it, because there are so much in cameras nowadays that you can't be an expert, unless you're working with it every day. And even us who are working every day, like, there's still some stuff that comes along.
Yeah.
We have to train ourselves.
And also very important for me to acknowledge I'm not trying to be, because I don't have the time to be, and it takes a huge amount of dedication and work to really understand the craft of videography and photography. I don't have that time. I need it to be simple for me so I can focus my energy and time into the audio and the interview and the connection with the person I'm speaking with, because that ultimately is what's the most important thing. Like
that's the most important thing for you. So it was, as I say, you've a kit there now that's allowing you to do that and grow with it. And as your knowledge and your comfort with it grows, you get to get more out of the kit, which is great. Would you be able to tell us maybe some of the stuff that you can do now that you have the kit that you weren't able to before you had the kit? And then maybe also in that, advise why the visual side of content creation now is so important, even for the likes of a podcast.
Well, podcasting is marketed through social media generally, and you're in a huge market where I think I know one person in my life who doesn't have a podcast at this point. And you have this huge marketplace that you're competing with people. So you've got to use your social media platform. And what's really interesting with like the really high-end slick stuff doesn't really translate to social media as much for podcasting. So what you got to have is, when I'm doing my interviews, I have the camera set up constantly, and I have another camera set up for a side angle that works really well. And then I have, if the person cannot be in the room, I obviously you use Zoom, which isn't ideal, but because one side of it is top quality, it doesn't matter so much that the other side isn't great.
Okay.
If both sides are bad, it doesn't look good. So that's one thing I've learned, is if I can bring a bit of quality to a 90-second promo by having well shot high resolution, well framed, and then this terrible person on Zoom with, like, who's got, like, you know, like in cats in the background and stuff, and you can make it look good and it works. But I've learned that with social media. But the other element of where it works is sometimes interviews are very visual. It's really strange to say, like, you get certain people, you know you're going to do an interview and you know you got to have your cameras there. Just, I interviewed Damien Brown, who's the guy who rode across the North Atlantic. He's a good friend of mine. I played rugby with him. And I found his story, I find it hard to believe that a human being rode across the North Atlantic Ocean on his own. It was meant to be two people, but one of the guys got sick. And he kept going. And I was in the interview, and if you watch me in the visual, I'm just like I'm almost angry with them because I can't understand. And you won't get that in audio. You don't see it. It's like, and you can see him just sitting there, and he's 6'7" or something, beast of a guy. And I think a lot of it brought it alive, because I was getting frustrated with this guy who took such a risk in his life. But then that's the difference. Some interviews, having a good visual, and it gives me the option as well. If I'm going out, I want to write, I want to film on field, and you know, I think the whole fear is gone for me. I can use the camera. I mean, I can use it, I can frame it, I can shoot it, I can change frame rates, I can do stuff like that where, I love a good slow motion, like that type of stuff. And these are things that you just gotta learn slowly, and you don't overwhelm yourself. But then you start to see the overlaps with audio and visual. You start to see things like, you know, bitrate and stuff like that where audio. So what's happening now with a lot of people I work with who are working in videography or direction, who mightn't be particularly versed at audio and have really good visual but have this really dodgy audio piece, and they'll send it to me and I'll fix it for them.
Okay.
And that's what I'll do. You'll figure out, like, how can you actually make that. So, and then I'm learning an awful lot of videographers are saying you shouldn't do that, try this. I love that. That's the only way I learn.
Yeah, well, like, knowledge sharing is key, really, and it's king, like, because
it is.
If you experience, there's no substitute for experience. So if somebody has done something wrong and then learned from it, or got it right immediately and shares it with you, it's a lot easier than have to figure out yourself.
It saves me sitting on YouTube listening to some lad shouting at me for 60 minutes. Like, if I can just, some guy go, come here, and he shows me on the camera, like, there's something, you know, sometimes the YouTube things, they're either too jazz handsy and you're like, oh my God, there's too much going on here, or it's just like, I have no idea what he's saying because the shot is so bad. And if the shot is really bad, that's not a good sign. So yeah, I do find YouTube is great for certain things. The way I learn is I learn in baby steps. Yeah. And I build those up, and then I start taking bigger steps with them. And I also learn by listening.
And just as regards to that, even like one of the things we said from the start is we're only on the end of a phone call as well, or a message. But it just shows.
Some of the stupid calls I've made to you guys, though, when I think about it, look like
nothing is ever stupid. Nothing is ever stupid.
You're only being nice to me, but sometimes you have this picture of lads putting the phone down going, oh my God, like, how do you turn this? No, I'm not that bad, but like, I have made a few of those phone calls.
That is what we're here for, because it's only, there's no question it's stupid, because if you don't know the answer, you just ask and then you get the answer and you know for the next time.
I'm just going to start ringing you for completely independent things. Literally everything. Like, phone a friend from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. It's permanent cameras. Yeah.
Just one of the, you've touched on it there, and I think it's important to get the message across to the people who are watching this, is that, you know, I think anyway, it will be a natural assumption from somebody who would be familiar with yourself and sees you're putting stuff up on your social media now, visual content, 90-second clips, longer clips. You use the example of doing Damien Brown there, the interview with him after he rode across the Atlantic. And they would automatically, I think anyway, assume that you've a video production team in, or through your connections through the music industry, you've got, you know, like guys who shoot music videos, or people, you know, studios, but basically a lot of people doing this for you, you know, like that you can just kind of click your fingers and go, here, come on in, do something for me because I need it done. And that's not the reality. You're doing it all yourself. Like, so you're doing the hard work of getting the guests on board and getting the podcast, but you're also doing all this content yourself as well. I think that's really important to emphasize to people, like, that it's being done by yourself.
That's kind of hilarious that because you did TV once in your life, people think, oh, sure, Jesus, they must have that lad must have. Like, I put out 1,700 podcasts in the last 2.5 years.
1,700.
There's 2 of us working on it, me and Aoife. That's it. That's all we got.
Yeah.
And we don't have the luxury of big production. And you're not just recording it. You're researching it. You're editing it. You are bringing every element yourself each podcast. When you're doing the Wake Up Wind Downs, it was twice a day, every day throughout the pandemic. So I don't have a production team. I have one, and then Kira has worked a lot with us as well. She doesn't work with us because she's doing another job. We don't have production teams. I wish we did. I love, like, when you look at the really slick podcasts, like The Diary of a CEO and all, they have teams and teams and streams of people behind them. They have social media teams, they have videography teams, they have editing teams. That's why it looks the way it looks, and that's why it's so good. 99.9% of podcasts do not have that luxury. So they have to think it's gorilla. That's what's beautiful about podcasting. I worry a little bit about podcasting is getting too slick. It's just becoming radio, where you have all these teams. I like the idea that it's gorilla, and it's 1 or 2 or 3 people kind of going like, how do we create content, put it out, make it sticky, make it relevant and have value. And when it gets really big, and now what you're seeing in America, and I'm not sure it's working, is you're seeing these big names going, oh, I have a podcast now. And it's not quite translating, because what I think really people love about podcasting, it's not about big names, it's about big stories. That's what makes podcasts. That's what I listen to. That's what most people listen to. And if you look at the biggest podcasts in the world, they weren't famous people. Andrew Huberman, I suppose Joe Rogan to a point might be a bad example, but he certainly wasn't. He wasn't an A-list celebrity in America. Now you're seeing these waves of kind of big A-listers doing podcasts, but it's not quite translating because we've heard it all. And I think that's what I love about podcasting. It's got a guerrilla element to it. It's got a little bit more chaos and madness to it. You don't know what you're going to get. And then you get the slicker ones, which are great. But actually, when I look through my podcast listens, they're all the kind of ones that, like the Irish History podcast. That's obviously it, because I'm Irish, but listening to it, it's just the guy researching it. That lad went away for a week and just fell into a load of books, crafted out. Listen to Blind Boy, he takes a story and he takes it off this literally take where you're like, where is this lad going? And it's unbelievable. And like Blind Boy probably does have the ability to bring him, but he doesn't do it because it might dilute what he does, the essence of what he is. So I think that's why I love podcasting.
Yeah, look, that was brilliant summed up. And I think the moral of what you've said there is, if you want to do it yourself. And you can do it. You might need to be taken out of your comfort zone, or you might need to learn one step a week for a few weeks, as you have done. But if you're in control of it, then you know exactly what's going to be going out there. You can do it when you want to do it, or when you can fit it into your schedule. And as I say, you can put stuff up like what you've been doing, which to me doesn't look much different to if you did have all those guys coming in to help you. So
don't get me wrong, I'd love it. But no, part of the buzz is that you're going, right, you got it. That's the hustle. That's the hustle of what you do. And it's my fear now is with the other elements of stuff that I have to do in my life, like I'm back and studying, like your time gets more and more diminished. So you don't want to drop your standard either. Yeah. So it's all these different things. But for me, the most core part of what I do is audio. And the core part of audio is the interview. Yeah. And the core part of the interview is connection. And anything else that takes from that will diminish it. So I love being able to go, I know exactly what I'm doing in the visual. I don't have to overthink it. I know how to edit it. I can do that after. But I know what's working in the background, and I can go and do it.
Just as regards to, you've just mentioned just various different aspects of making the podcast work there. So maybe tell us some cool, you did mention one interesting guest there, but maybe some cool or interesting guests or places that the kid has been and allowed you to get better content to promote the podcast.
Yeah, actually, when I got the kit, I had just missed out on a few, I'll tell you one story I probably shouldn't tell you was Adam Clayton.
Okay.
And I'm a massive Adam Clayton fan. I have been for years. Massive YouTube fan, but particularly Adam Clayton. And I was lucky enough to go up to his house, and I had I didn't have my full kit. I had a Canon, and I wasn't sure. I still wasn't comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And I set it up, and this is the best. This is like unbelievable shot. He had this beautiful room, and I recorded it, and I didn't record it.
Okay.
And I can't tell you how literally physically sick I felt when I got back, because it was such a good interview, and he's just so at ease in it that I was cursing myself that I didn't capture it. But then other interviews I would have done, like people like Deepak Chopra, in my world, I've studied him for years. You know, to other people, they might be like, who's Deepak Chopra? But to me, he is one of the top spiritual leaders in the world. And when you've spent your masters studying a particular person, and then you're sitting in front of them and you're interviewing them, it's a pretty incredible experience. And also, like with him, I was thinking, if this Deepak Chopra's done 1,000 podcasts, asked the same questions, how can I come differently at this with him? So of course I started talking about the Christian brothers and spirituality and Irish. Well, I talked about that the Irish pagans used to meditate with the land. Was the land, like the relationship between them and the land. And all of us, we just went in this amazing kind of monologue about spirituality in the land and that type of stuff. Finding yourself, knowing you're speaking to somebody in a podcast that's had 1 million interviews and going, like, I actually just want to ask them questions they've never been asked before. But Andrew Huberman was another one. He's the Huberman Labs, #1 podcast in the world at the moment. So yeah, I've had quite a good few people on it. I've had Moby, I actually had Moby, who I do love. His album Play was a massive influence on me. And when I was in Los Angeles, I had interviewed him before, and I said to him, can I, come over to your house? I was like, I had the setup and everything.
Yeah.
I'm going over to Mount Moby. I'm going to film in Moby's gaff. This is going to be slick. Me, and it was just because that's the other important thing. Moby wouldn't want me arriving with 2 or 3 other people.
Yeah.
He just wouldn't. So he had a relationship with me. So he expected to see me, not a camera crew. So I had the camera set up. Going, we'll see Moby. It's going to be amazing. We're going to shoot in the house. And then he got COVID.
Oh no.
And I had flown over.
Oh my God.
So that was particularly difficult. But that was the other element, I suppose I should say. When you're doing an intimate, slightly sensitive interview with people, where you really have to get them to trust you, and that's the first 20 minutes of the conversation. You got to know they're in safe hands. They got to know they're in safe hands. It can be more difficult when there's other people in the room.
Okay.
So knowing you can set it up yourself and do it.
This goes back to doing it yourself.
Yeah, it does help. It makes them more at ease. I did it with Robin Williams' son, Zach. It was just the 2 of us, and there was 2 cameras there. But to him, it was like just the 2 of us. And that does make a difference. It creates an energy in a room.
And that's actually a very interesting point and something I would have never even thought of. But even we're here today doing this. We have
the boys are sound. Oh, we're good.
Yeah, they're okay. They're not going to intimidate us too much. But we have 2 people here. Yeah. We have lights set up the whole lot, so I immediately understand what you're saying there, even though I would never have thought of it.
You need it. I just think in particular interviews, I'll make a judgment call with the person I'm doing it with.
Yeah.
That they might be shy. I actually, I interviewed Nick Sinner of the AAA, it's one of my favorite bands. And I knew he was a shy guy. Okay. And he's an incredible human being, but he's shy. And some people are shy, and you got to just honor that. And you got to make them at ease in your company. Yeah. And sometimes when there's other people, it can stop that.
Okay, so we might move on from the equipment now and what you're using it for and how you're using it, maybe just to your podcast. Again, I'm sure a lot of people, as I mentioned, are fans of and listen to it. You've already mentioned you've had 1,700 go out over the last 2 years, so that's a hell of a lot. You also mentioned there that it's not so much the current season, it's just going to keep on going until further notice. So it's not like you have a set plan for a duration or X amount of episodes. So maybe you might just talk about some of the work you'll be doing on the podcast, or some stuff you've been proud of and the recent stuff, and going forward, anything exciting coming up.
Yeah, I suppose the thing during the pandemic, I kind of realized very early in the pandemic that this is going to be chaos, and it's going to hit people. It was hitting people quite quickly. You know, the lockdown, we'd never experienced anything like it. People's sleep patterns went all over the place. You know, there was this overwhelm that was hitting everyone like a wave, tsunami. And it's hitting me too. And I moved home with my parents to Cocoon. My dad was ex-military. He probably thought he could beat every virus. And I was like, no, I'm moving home. And I set up in my little spare room in my mum's, like an old mattress from the 70s and a crap duvet is acoustic. Like, honestly, that's what I had. It was the wake up wind downs. And I said to Spotify, listen, I'm going to do a meditation or reflection in the morning and a meditation in the evening to help people sleep. Like, that's all I can contribute here. I have nothing else to do, so I'm going to do that. And within 6 months, it was #1 in America, health and fitness. It was translated into 6 different languages all over the world. And it's just me putting people to sleep, which I always knew my voice would do one day. And that's what the Wake Up Wind Down was. And it actually became not just important for a lot of people, it became really important to me because I was like, I had a focus. I had something to give. And every week I'd pick a theme, like I did a theme on Anthony Hopkins. Like, I think Anthony Hopkins is unbelievable. Like, if you actually listen to these, he does these monologues on social media. I'm like, this guy's a genius. And I started doing like different things like that, and people really responded to it. But then I have the weekly podcast, which is Where's My Mind? And that kind of is bigger, longer 60-minute episodes where you're kind of taking a subject and you're deconstructing the subject. But people think it's a mental health podcast. It's a culture podcast. Because the big thing I look at is we keep putting all the emphasis on the individual. We keep saying, you need to be more resilient. You need to be able to deal with stress. You need to be just a little bit stronger. And I'm kind of going, well, actually now, we all just stop for a second and look around us. You'll start to realize we live in chaos. The world feels chaotic. It's overwhelming a lot of people. Maybe it's not all on us. And of course, there's a bit of it where, you know, we have to take personal responsibility and there's certain things we have to do for ourselves. But I just feel sometimes culture gets a free run all the time and we never question it. And an example of that is like, you know, I did an episode called The Privatization of Stress. And it was like, if you're on a 0-hour contract in Dublin City, not knowing when your next day of work's going to come and you have to pay rent and all the other stuff that comes along with that, that's going to get in on you. No matter how resilient or stressful you're able to deal with stress, that's going to get in on you. And then you wake up one morning and the eviction ban's been lifted. And you start to feel like, oh my God, I have nowhere to go here. That's going to get in on you. And it feels like we often just always put it on the person. You just need to be able to deal with that, Brian. You should be able to deal with that. And the wellness industry pushes that. It's like, you just need to drink more water or, you know, meditate more or run faster. And it's like, no, sometimes you just got to look around you. And I think that's what people really got from the podcast. They're like, okay, I'm not the only one who feels that this is a bit chaotic. And I take really big topics and I deconstruct them, sometimes with experts, sometimes with people who are lived experience. Sometimes it's just my own experience. And I think people resonate with it. As I said, the big thing about the podcast, it's not a lecture. I haven't a clue sometimes. You know, I haven't figured all this out. I have no solutions. What I do know is I'm a human being, and like, I go through the good, bad and ugly of life like everybody else does. And I think that's the shared consciousness that I try to create in the podcast. And it's also slightly irreverent. I pull the piss out of myself quite a lot because the mind is hilarious. If you think about it, it is kind of funny. And sometimes it can be too intense to be really talking about it. Like, it's sometimes like the state of it. You just stand back and look at my mind and go, what is it doing? Like, for somebody who's struggled, I suppose, with anxiety all his life, anxiety makes the impossible possible. But it's also, to me, sometimes a gift because the creative mind it's beauty and beast. It's a curse and a blessing. And all I've learned to do is how do I step away from creativity when I don't need to be there? But that's what the podcast is about, and I'm really proud of it. I put a lot into it, and I love it when people kind of come up and say, listen, that's actually that episode. That I needed that. Whatever it was, I needed that. I was hit a wall. I didn't know what to do. And one of the other things we look at is things like burnout and trying to keep up with the pace of the modern world. And the last episode we had was called The Rest Revolution. Like, I'm writing a book on how to sit in your arse and do nothing and not feel guilty about it. You won't see that on TikTok. The minute you go on TikTok, you'll have some guy going, "What are you doing? You need to be fitter. You need to be going to the gym. You need to not be eating that." You're like, oh, just piss off for 5 seconds and let me sit down and rest. I've just done a 40-hour week. I don't need to be told I should be doing better today. And that is really important to say to people. We're human beings. We're not human doings. We need rest. We need space. We need to go out and shout at fish in the lake like I do sometimes. You need to get it out. And we need to create a culture that accepts that. And I think that's what I'm trying to do with that.
We've spoken off camera about this as well, numerous things. I know firsthand, you helped people through the pandemic, as you say, with your podcast. My wife was working from home through the pandemic. She was listening to it, was helping her, keeping her going. I think one thing that I noticed over and over when your name would come up, people would see that we've done stuff with you or supplied or worked with you, is the vast array of different types of people that be familiar with what you do, the different ages of people, male and female, adults, children, people who are grandparents. And it hits everybody, because what you said there is, it's to help with your mental health, but it's not about mental health, it's culture. So, it's not trying to put people down or kind of tell people they need to be better. You're covering topics that will help their mental health, but they're easy to listen to. You don't feel self-critical after, or, I have to change myself in the morning, because otherwise, I'm not going to get, a better life, or, things aren't going to be easier.
And it's important to point out, I also massively advocate for, having a purpose and having a North Star and motivation and pushing yourself when you're pushing yourself and resting when you're resting. The problem is when it's all you do is push, 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 push. And I think push is important. I've done it all my life. I've always picked challenges and pushed myself and brought myself to the limit where I think I can go, and got out of my comfort zone. And I feel really comfortable doing that. And not everybody wants to do that. Everyone's subjective, has their own experience. But I do think the idea of we are creating a culture now, especially for young people, where they're told they can't possibly be happy or good enough unless they constantly are doing all the time. And the other thing I worry about is, I think one of the most important things we got, and I'm the worst at this, is I don't think we have enough fun. I don't think we have enough crack. Therapists and psychologists sometimes call it vitamin P or vitamin playfulness, where you gotta just do that thing you can't believe you're doing. You gotta just do that thing or go to that place. What's the point? What's the point of going there? Who cares? There doesn't have to be a point to everything we do. And that spontaneity, that bit of crack. And sometimes I find myself going, this is all being too serious. You gotta go out. And one of my favorite, I tell this story of a friend of mine, one of my good mates, and he's a biker guy, beer down to us. He's like Sons of Anarchy kind of going on. And we were out in a coffee shop a couple years ago, and he went to pay for his coffee, and he just kind of put his hand in his pocket, and he went to take. He didn't really look, but it was a condom. It was a pack. And when I saw it, I lost control of my legs. I fell on the ground laughing. It was just because the context of the whole thing, and I fell on it because it was just so funny. And he was going, get up. And I kind of thought to myself, I'm making it, but I don't care, because it's one of those laughing moments where you've lost control of all functioning of your body, and you're just letting it go and go with it. You don't care if you look like a fool. You don't care if everyone feels stupid. And it's that kind of stuff. Sometimes the world's got so serious. And also the other thing I worry about is when people are having those moments I have, or anyone else has, we have to document it. Oh God, you got to film this. I was like, no, you don't. And it's that voyeurism, that constant on Big Brother thing, that I think can really get in on people and make them feel like they're always being watched and always have to live up to this perfect level of morality. We're all fools. We're all stupid. We're all wonderful. We all do beautiful, terrible things. We all do all of these things. We don't need to document them, and we don't need to highlight them and put them online for people. And I think especially young people, you're meant to mess up. Honestly, genuinely, Ryan, if there was camera phones when I was a teenager, I wouldn't have a career.
Yeah, actually.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
Like I did, like every teenager, stupid thing. I didn't need anyone documenting, and that's the difference. And I think that's what I always say to people: don't document your friend's downfall. It's just not. It's one of the worst things people can do, and it's that stuff that I think gets in. That's a cultural thing. That's what gets in on people. People feel like they're being surveilled all the time, monitored all the time, and they have to live up to this perfect. None of us are, and especially young people. I would say just let yourself be silly, stupid, good, bad, all this stuff. That's how you learn. That's how you find and carve out your values and what you want to be in life. I worry about that with young people, that they're not being let to do that. I think it's important.
Everything you're saying there, like, I just love it all. Not documenting stuff, like, you know, I've got to a stage now, if I go to a sporting event or concert, see my phone in my pocket, I don't do any videos of it anymore. I'm like, I'm here to enjoy it.
And that's great,
you
like,
know.
because you're documenting a beautiful moment, and that's fine. But when your friend is falling asleep in a chipper at 3 and 4 in the morning, let him, just wake him up and get him into a taxi and get him home. You know, don't make your first port of call document that. And I think it's that stuff I'm talking about. Might feel funny for you, but when that guy's looking to get a job in 6 years' time, it's not so funny. And I think it's that stuff. And I think it's natural that we all have that bit of, you know, we want our TikTok and we want the views and we want that stuff. But a friend's a friend. You don't do that to friends.
Oh, I hear you on that. I also like, you know, what you're saying about, you know, like, don't be afraid and go out and experience things and do things. Like, you only live once, so you may as well do it, have as much fun as you can.
And you don't need a purpose to do it. That's the other thing. It's like, sometimes people go, well, why would you do that? I don't know. And maybe I shouldn't have, but like, I did it. And it's stuff like that. And I think, as I said, please don't let this be a lecture, because I get into those spaces where, like, I've had no crack for the last month. What have I been doing? Just go out. And there's certain people in my life that I will reach out to when I want that kind of crack, who are just, we all have one or two of those friends that they're just hilarious. Like, they just have that ability to tear you apart and make you fall apart laughing. And you gotta connect with them more often. I think, you know, they're good for the soul, I would say.
Definitely are. They're very important. We have some questions from people we put out on social media about some questions for you. We did get a few. Now, some of the questions we got, we would have covered up already, so I'm not going to ask all the questions. I'll pick out 4 or 5 ones here that maybe are slightly different to what we've covered already, and you might be able to give the answer to people for. Just before we go on to them, is there anything we haven't covered you might want to add in here? Have you anything you're working on or anything exciting coming up that you might want to give us a sneak preview on?
I'm working on quite a few things at the moment that are kind of expanding the podcast area a little bit, like more towards kind of documentary based stuff, where the visual will become even more important, I think. You know, where you have to document certain elements of it. Because even if you look at, say, some of the massive shows on Netflix, a lot of them came out of podcasting. Like the Murdoch Murders, that was a podcast. Now it's Netflix. You know, these. So I always think in the back of my head, it's important to be capturing the visuals, because it could come to a point where, with your IP and your intellectual property, that you've created this documentary, that you can go, well, actually, I've compiled a lot of visual elements to this as well. And not that you make that, but when somebody else comes in to potentially make visual of that documentary, go, well, I have a body of work here that we can use that you wouldn't be able to capture if you went back, because you capture it once kind of thing. So now it's constantly in my head. You mightn't use it, but you bank it. And you bank it for that moment. Because that's, when you're in the creative industry, you got to bank everything. You mightn't ever use it. But then comes a moment you're like, thank God I have this. And you have to, that's the workload. You could, I've 3 or 4 hard drives full of stuff that will never be used. But you got to bank it. That's your job. You know.
So watch this space.
Yeah.
Okay. So Mike, there's probably 4 questions here that I'll just ask, if you don't mind. Thanks to everybody for sending the questions. As I say, some of the questions that were sent in have already been answered in what we've covered already. But we'll start with a question from Stephen Fitzgerald. So he's asked, is the name stroke profile of the guests on your podcast more important than their level of expertise or vice versa?
A really good question. No, actually, profile is down the pecking order.
Okay.
I've had people who have reached out from agencies to have people on, and they're just not overly willing to tell their story. A lot of people are so media trained, and understandably, because anything they say can get ripped out of context, put into a headline, and then it can just be stress city for these people. If they're a big name, for example, a big musician or whatever, they go onto a podcast. How many times have you seen it? They go onto a podcast, they say something as part of a full conversation. Somebody on some media platform take that line off, put it in the headline, and throw them under a bus without zero context to what the conversation was about. So when we work so hard to put context into the equation and then it gets ripped out, I can understand why big names are so protected and why they're wary of saying anything. So, but on the side of that, I don't enjoy those interviews when it feels like you're talking to somebody deeply protected and doesn't want. I enjoy people who can just connect. So it's more about the big stories. But with expertise, you also need to understand you sometimes have brilliant experts who are not great communicators. So you got to get that line where the good communicators, they know what they're talking about and you keep them on point. But also, sometimes I think in podcasting and in what I do, statistics and data can dehumanize. These are the numbers, and you're like, okay. But then when you actually start thinking of the person and people, that's the emotive response. We don't really respond to the statistics. We respond to the person and the story. So you bring that all in. So it depends on the subject. Okay. But ultimately, the subjects that I deal with, I'd be more interested in people with lived experience.
Okay. We have another question kind of related, actually. It's further down, but I'll ask it next. It's from Paul Butler. So thanks, Paul. Who was the most difficult guest you've had on your show?
Most difficult? I mean, depending difficulty, I've had guests where I have felt out of my comfort zone, where I just don't have the knowledge here, and I can feel it in the interview, and I can feel
it's a bit like me talking to you here.
No, it's but like it would be about a subject, and you'd be like, I know this guy called Ian McKilcret. Christ, I can't pronounce it properly, but he's one of the most, he's a global intellect, a psychiatrist, genius, and we got on really, really well, but I felt like I can't actually do this. He's intimidating me a lot, and I'm trying to know what I was doing. I was trying to intellectualize something I couldn't intellectualize, and I felt really exposed and awkward and uncomfortable for the whole thing. And I actually, I told him, which was interesting, and he was like, well, thanks so much for saying that. But it was actually, it was a great interview, and it worked out well, but it was really uncomfortable for me, and it made me realize I will never ever go into an interview like that unprepared again.
And so that's a lesson for me now for going forward as well.
Well, you're certainly not. You don't need to intellectualize anything with me.
Next question is from Ailish Lopez. So thank you, Ailish, for sending this in. What do you feel is a greater achievement? Your success with your band, your music background, or your work through your podcast for mental health and Lust for Life charity?
Entirely different things.
Okay.
The thing I'm most proud of is Lust for Life. So what I never wanted to be in my work is a problem admiration society. I did not want to be a stone thrower. We don't have a good mental health system. We know that. What could I bring to the table was always what I wanted to think about. And what I could bring to the table is what Ireland has is an incredibly good, efficient, strong education system that a lot of people are very proud of. So let's tap into that. And Lust for Life set up, 4 or 5 years ago. We've just surpassed 1,000 primary schools now with our programs. They're free programs. There's no cost to schools. We will be in every primary school by the end of 2024, and then we move into secondary school system. And then we look at it, curriculum-based mental health education and what it looks like. That was my dream from day one. And it certainly wasn't just me. It was Paul and Colin and everyone else with us for life that built that, and the teachers that came with us. So that's what I'm most proud of, because it was the most difficult. It was really, really difficult, because there are so many things you won't see that has to happen for you to be able to develop mental health programming for schools. There's a huge level of work and commitment. And I stood outside the bank in AIB in Bagot Street looking for a loan to build a charity with no business plan and, no money to do it. And we built it into a really strong charity and organization that's now delivering this education intervention, early intervention programs, which is ultimately where it's led me into my PhD, to study what early intervention programs look like. And in Ireland and across the world, when it comes to mental health, we predominantly just focus on crisis intervention. We wait for the person to get to a point of crisis, then we intervene with a very inadequate crisis system anyway, that doesn't really do the work it needs to do. And my whole passion is to stop people getting to the point of crisis. And to me, the best way to do that is to develop really strong educational programs. It won't solve all problems, but it will definitely have a huge, huge impact on mental health and emotional well-being and all that comes with that. Empathy, compassion, relationships, all those different things that lead off that. And I think in Ireland, this country, like where I was born and bred and will live for the rest of my life, one of the wealthiest countries in Europe, we shouldn't have these issues. These issues are bad policy. These issues are bad planning. These issues are myopic leadership. And of a population of 5 million, under no circumstances, with the type of wealth we have in this country, should we be in this position. And that's not political, that's just about humanity. People shouldn't have to struggle for things that they should be able to get access to. And we live in a great country, we have lots of great things, but this is something we can deal with. And we can be a world leader, I think, because of our size and our population. I think we should strive to be that. And I want to work, and Us for Life wants to work with politicians and leaders. We don't want to fight them. It's not going to get us anywhere here.
Again, with 2 children in primary school, of a baby who will be in primary school eventually, I'm well aware of the work that Us for Life does. I think it's brilliant. So fair play, and please keep up the good work on that. We have one more question before we finish. It's from Aoife Malone. So this is actually related to the equipment rather than the work you do. So would you recommend the Canon kit that you use for someone who wants to create content but is a novice in this area?
Absolutely. Like, it is so user friendly. Like, actually how I've learned to use my equipment, when you go into the menu, so remember I talked about this one day. So first week, I just looked at number 1 on the menu. There's 6 things in the menu. I looked at number 1 and I looked at all the different things, and I said, what does that do? And I'd write a little note of what that does. I probably won't use it, but I'll write a note, have an idea what it is. I can't even spell these words, never mind understand them. But I just wrote them all down, and I started at number 1 and I got to number 6. So then when you're kind of going, how do I connect this to the wireless? Oh yeah, number 5, number 4, bang, done. And it's so user friendly. And then I wouldn't get overcut with things like angles and stuff. So just understand the menu, understand what it does, and things like, and I'll be straight up about it, like, I'm not a videographer. Like, I just put on the automatic settings. I get them to do all the work.
Start and stop,
that's it. And if I need to do something like change a frame rate or maybe do a bit of kind of cutaway stuff, I know how to do that. If I want to, like different elements of stuff that I think, what's beautiful about the Canon as well is, like, you don't realize, people always talk about phones and stuff, but when actually you only start to realize when you're shooting detail, the difference it makes. Like, the detail stuff is the clarity, the detail, and how, for me, weird, how nice that is. I think the human eye likes detail and clarity, and yes, we like the kind of terrible camera phone stuff as well, but I think sometimes when you show something that's really well shot, only then, we always say that in music, people go, oh, no one listens to the lyrics. I was like, well, that's until they hear a good lyric. And it stops them. It's the same with, like, oh, no one really cares about that stuff. And then you see something like, whoa, that's beautiful. and I think that's the art of it.
I agree. Like, if you are looking at content on a phone, I immediately will be able to say that was shot with a phone, that was shot on a camera. The detail, the colours, the clarity, there's just no comparison. Phones are convenient, but if you want quality, the cameras.
When you can if you can get the Canon to be phone, that would be cool.
I have to send that back to R&D department in Japan.
I've done it. They haven't got back to me yet, so I'm awaiting that email.
And just I'll just add in there a question from me for thank you. Like Kiwi supplied us the R6, 2 R6 cameras, some RF lenses, but there's various different Canon models that will fit all budgets and even.
And they have the same template.
Same template,
menu, like,
all the same template.
That's the thing.
Same menu, same just sensor might be slightly different, or the autofocusing system may not be quite as complex, but the look and feel of the layout of the camera and the menu system will be the same no matter which one you go to.
And that really does help, and you can graduate up, I suppose. Yeah,
no, that's the whole point, that you can go forward into the range as you have a requirement for the higher spec. So that's the questions. Thank you so much for all of that. That really brilliant to have this conversation with you. We have one more thing before we finish. We have a customer of ours who I believe you also know. So Frank Greeley from Irish Runner Magazine has sent us in something that he wanted to give you himself. He couldn't make it in, so we're just going to get one of the guys off camera to pass on to me here. So Frank has sent this in for me to present to you there. So
look at the state of that foot.
So
they look a little broody and runnery. Look at it. But I'm not ashamed for the front cover.
So there you go. So Frank Greeley is the Irish Runner Magazine, and he's given this in to present to Bressie here now. So this is framed. It's a gorgeous frame. It's lovely there now. There was obviously a 4-page spread on it at some stage in his Irish Runner Magazine. And there's a book that Frank has written as well, Running Full Circle. Well, there you go. And there's a cover note there from Frank there.
Can I add there as well? 100% the worst runner they've ever had on the front cover of Irish Runner. I am 6'6", 17 stone. I'm not built for marathon running, but I did them. And I remember Frank, he was very kind in the article, but as I said, I am no runner, but it was a privilege to be part of it.
Well, it arrived in today. I think it's fantastic. It's absolutely brilliant. And it's a very kind gesture as well. So
yeah, he's a gent. Thank you so much. Cheers, Frank.
Okay. So, going to wrap it up there now. Thank you so much for that conversation. It was absolutely brilliant. I hope everybody who's watching got something out of it. And we look forward to continuing to help you on your path through all your exciting projects you have in the future. So thanks for coming in. Thanks for sparing us. You're really busy. You mentioned you have your PhD, you're a podcast, you have the band, you have everything going on. So keep up the great work on all sides. Thank you for joining us. Thank you everybody for tuning in. If you have any questions, technical or otherwise, that you want to ask us, please get in contact through us. You can email sales@birminghamcameras.ie. You can call us, or you can go on the website.
You can ring them about any question, nothing to do with film and cameras. Don't worry about it. Anything from, dishwasher issues to issues with your garden tips, gardening, anything. You ring Birmingham Cram, Brian will sort you out.
No, pass those ones on to Kirstine and Natasha, to be fair. I'm not the dishwasher expert. Thanks very much, and thanks everybody for tuning in.
Cheers, guys.